Hey, I'm Scott Cuthbert, CEO of Safeopedia,
And I'm Gabe Encarnacion. I'm Vice President of BBL Safety.
and thank you guys for tuning in today to Safeonomics. And we've got an exciting episode for you today, episode number 2. I don't know if should we keep track of them or should we just?
Let's keep track of it. I'm just going to come up with a different number every time.
Yeah. And I remember a radio station started here, and they'd always talk about how, we've got listener number 14.
Yeah, exactly.
We should do it by listeners. But yeah, we have an exciting episode today. We've got one of our favorite safety influencers joining us, Abby Ferri, to talk about how to become an influencer and share some of her experiences. So super interesting. I know you and Abby have probably had many more conversations than I have. So
yeah, this will be a lot of fun. Abby has some fantastic experience in the safety profession. I believe it was 20 years of experience in safety, and really diverse backgrounds and concepts, and just the way that she approaches the profession is just it really is special. There's a lot of stuff that I know I've learned from talking with her and listening to how she approaches her work in safety, and really excited to see her role now with Insurate, and how she's taking all that experience in safety and applying it to this whole direction with insurance. And yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. I'm excited to have her on Safeonomics.
yeah, me as well. I think she graduated from university when she was 15, right?
That's got to be it.
That's the only way she's got 20 years of experience. But yeah, I mean, obviously a leading example. I'm sure she probably doesn't need any introduction, which really speaks to her as an influencer in the industry with the Safety Justice League podcast and all of her great work at ASSP and Women in Safety. She's been kind of everywhere, and doing her day job and volunteering her personal time, to help move things forward within the industry. So super excited to have her on today.
So that's your really nice way of saying that we were really lucky to get her as a guest, because there's no way we would have gotten her as a guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Abby, you want to give us a quick intro as to what you're doing, and even some of the conversations as to why we're talking about intersections of business and safety?
Yeah, my mind just went like blank, but also in a bunch of different directions. So this will be good. So right now I'm working for Insurate as their chief risk officer, in charge of all risk management, risk control services for our clients, and also bridging between our clients and their insurance agents as far as how risk control will be done for their individual accounts. So we have an underwriting algorithm, a proprietary underwriting algorithm that looks at companies in a different way and is able to provide a more accurate proposal for their workers' comp insurance based on how they actually do things, not just all the lagging indicators that we're all familiar with. So the intersection of business and safety for me, as I work in the insurance field, I mean, I've come from working as a safety director for a construction company and different capacities in safety for mostly in construction, and working for myself as a consultant. So business and safety has meant different things to me over the course of my career. From the beginning, where people told me I should be happy that our CEO didn't give me a budget to stick within, to being a consultant, independent, working for myself and looking at every single dollar. So, and then everything in between.
Yeah. Wow. So that's, you've seen both ends of the spectrum. And so you said, even from working with I'm assuming a larger company, all the way to even being an independent consultant. So you've had to deal with multiple people, budgets of all sizes, departments of all sizes. I mean, one of the things that I've seen, which is really hard, is even just getting your own agenda moved as a safety professional. So even with your idea of well, let me back up to the question. Essentially, is it, how did you get your agenda moved in safety, whether it was through as an independent consultant, or even as part of a larger organization, just understanding the business and working with it that way.
Yeah. When I worked for others, I didn't really understand it at the time. I just felt like this was the right thing to do, which was to really have my numbers straight of, what things cost, how that relates to injuries, and then to get allies. Like, I didn't even know that I was doing that back then, that I would go to a project manager and say, hey, we had to buy a bunch of this equipment, these consumable, this PPE on this job. Like, maybe next time we should plan ahead for this based on this type of job. And I knew which project managers to go to that were very mindful of budget and detail oriented, because, some project managers are a little more Wild West,
Right.
which is fine. There's a place for that. But for me to find allies, it was those more detail oriented project managers, and then leveling up, to people that were above their level, getting an ally there. And I mean, once you align with the CFO, the CEO, and the company's goals, then who's going to argue with you, right? Like, you're trying to build an unarguable stance, really, that it's like, how could you say no to the safety director and their proposed budget? Like, that's heartless and dumb, and
Yeah.
here's all the ways. So yeah, I just felt that finding those allies, and also this was a function of me being a department of one. In my experience working for employers, not working for myself, I only had one employer situation where I actually had other people in a safety department. Otherwise, I was always by myself. So that's why I sought out allies. But even if you're part of a safety department, I still think that the ally concept is important.
Yeah, I want to jump in and just zoom out for a sec. We're kind of know each other for quite a while and pretty comfortable, and we just sort of jumped right in. But just to set a little bit of context, obviously, Gabe and I have been talking for a while. We had this idea for Safeonomics kind of podcast, whatever you want to call it, in order to kind of talk about business and that intersection, like you guys touched on, between business and safety. And we really were super excited to have you on, today, and to be picking your brain, because you're a shining example of, I think, an influencer. And you may not have set out to be an influencer, but I think you've definitely become an influencer within your respective organizations, but also, within the industry as a whole as well. And I think there's some really important lessons for people to learn, because we do hear over and over again, it's like, how do I get my executive team to support me? How do I get my management team to support me? And even how do I get the frontline workers to buy in and go along with the safety program and the direction or the initiatives set by the safety director. So with that said, hopefully sets a little bit of context for the conversation that we jumped into, but also want to ask you, like, you've never been sort of that check the box kind of person. You're definitely forward thinking. So does this just come naturally to you, or was there a point, in your career where you're like, hey, I got to get ahead of this, and I got to start thinking about, the red zone, while I'm still in midfield, kind of?
Yeah, you mentioned getting the frontline workers on board, and for me, I just kind of naturally stumbled into some good techniques for that, where, things as simple as asking people, what do you think? Why are you doing that? How much does that cost? Whatever it is. So I naturally did that, and was very, I guess, rewarded by that, by kind of seeking out the relationship building before having sometimes a crisis or other situation where I needed those people. It's kind of like when people are networking and then they need a job. It's going to be a lot easier to have those connections made for you when you're looking for a job if you've been nurturing your network. So at work, I was always nurturing the network, just just short conversations with people, being curious about what they do. And I know, like, with HOP, human organizational performance being a buzzword in safety, and the curious conversations and that sort of thing. Like, I just kind of laugh sometimes because I think, well, that's what I did. No one told me what to do. That's just what I did. That was my personality. So if someone's curious about how things work and likes to ask questions and doesn't feel, apprehensive about asking questions, you're going to do great in safety. And, just don't worry about the flavor of the week of, what safety professionals are subscribing to as far as different philosophies. So, all that aside, I also kind of reinforced the things that I was doing naturally, but then also sought out mentors. And I didn't even think about that at the time, but I was encouraged by that CEO that didn't give me a budget. He gave me a credit card and said, go for it, be a safety pro. And I was like, all right. And so I went to, so I just kind of got self-educated and joined the Associated General Contractors Safety Committee in my area, and sought out the education and knowledge and wisdom from the people that were in safety around that table. And so that's when I even just learned of the concept of a safety budget, because to my diploma back there from my master's in environmental health and safety, but we didn't talk too much about budgeting for safety. And, that was kind of okay. I learned on the fly, learned on the job, and was able to have some really great guidance from mentors at that group and from other groups since then too. And now people ask me and, I just have the same advice, is that, budgeting is budgeting really at the end of the day. And then you just add in your nuances of, who do you need on your side? Who are those allies? Because then it becomes the messaging and the communication to get people on board with you with that, basic budget that you're just following. I mean, literally look up, how do I make a budget? You find out what things cost. You find out what you spent last year. You anticipate what you're going to spend, and other factors. And so then it's just communication after that. And that's where I think a lot of people have, the learning curve, but they're framing it as, I don't know how to budget for safety, but it's actually, I don't know how to communicate my safety budget is the problem.
So what's so interesting about this too, and I'm sure I'm going to go back through the recording of this and see how many times we said the word budget, because it just seems like one of those things where it's like, it's just so much on people's minds. And it is really beneficial that you had someone that basically gave you, just as you said, the credit card and let you just be the safety pro. But most of the things that you were talking about, like finding a mentor, asking questions of the people that were doing the work, just being curious, that doesn't matter how much of a budget you have. You can do that if you have zero budget and still do
that's
that.
free.
Yeah, exactly.
Asking questions is free. Yeah, that's a great point.
Which is really cool. Yeah, that's really neat, because it's like, I know that there are some people that are going to hear this and be like, well, I do have a budget. It's grossly small. How do I even do this? How do I get the ear of the CFO? Or how do I understand the way my business works so that I can get my agenda moving forward and not just be that check the box safety pro? Everything that you mentioned doesn't require a budget, or most of the things that you mentioned, except for, of course, like the PPE and the things you actually have to pay dollars for. But just being curious and finding out and asking questions is massive. So that's pretty special, actually.
But what if your budget is abysmal? I guess, like, when you were saying that, like, if your budget's too small, well, how do you know? So then to me, that just points to like a knowledge gap to whoever is, holding the purse strings, and you saying, I need more money. And again, it's a communication issue at that point too. And as we started talking about influence, if you're influencing in all these different departments, so they have that visual, they have that visibility into what does it cost to do safety and do safety well, and how does that impact this job that I'm managing, or this site that I have to manage. And if you can get them on your side, they really speak for you at that point. And it's like, I mean, I worked for a general contractor, so my natural thing I want to do is sub things out. So if I can sub out the influence of the safety budgeting, heck yeah, I'll do that. I'd rather have a project manager be telling the CEO, we need more money for this, and it's a safety thing. Great, you tell them, because I've been telling them too. So sub out that influence. I think it doesn't always have to come from the safety professional, that it might be something where you're feeding numbers to these department leaders and then they take that and run with it. And maybe that's why someone early on said, don't worry if you don't have a safety budget, that maybe it should be safety as part of these department budgets or a job site budget. It's not a standalone, here's the safety budget and what we have to spend. It's like, no, you're building something, you're making something. Safety is part of that. So that's on you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that was going to be my question. I was going to also say, Gabe touched on it. It's like how to get two finance guys, excited is just say budget a bunch of times. So we're definitely on the right track. But yeah, I was going to ask, and I know it might be different from industry to industry, and definitely I have more experience in the construction field, similar to you. But should there be a safety budget standalone, and what should be in that standalone budget, if anything, and how did you go about it? I mean, you kind of touched on it, but so what's in, what's out, and then how do you get those projects to properly allocate budget towards those safety elements like PPE, right?
So I kind of gave away my view. I really do think if there's safety things that are part of doing the work, that is on that department, that operational budget, not a safety budget. A safety budget is when I was the lone safety professional at an organization, it's how much are my membership dues for this safety group I'm in? How much is it going to cost to, upgrade my company vehicle? How much will it cost to, just like specific to the department of safety. I really tried, especially in construction, when we had jobs that were going on, that we could charge things to a job. I felt that it was important for project managers and then estimators to realistically bid and work their jobs and not say, oh, that's on the safety budget. No, it's not. I don't get all that safety stuff back at the end of the job, nor do I want it. And so once I put that back on project managers in a construction setting, they started managing it. And they would look at, well, I can pad the bid on this job and buy some fall protection and use it on the next job, because this is a short-term job and I'm going to take the same crew. And they were starting to think a little bit differently. And then I didn't have to think about that stuff. I don't need to worry about how many carpenters need a new harness on the next job. That project manager needs to do that. Right. If they need assistance in identifying what's the best harness for those guys to use, by all means, please call me. If they need a distributor that's in an area that they've never worked before, I can help with that too. But my safety budget was my stuff, my things, my professional development, not what's going on in the job.
That's such a cool perspective on it too, because it's this idea of not just putting safety into a silo. And that's something that Scott and I have talked about, and I've had this discussion with a few other safety professionals, is that how do you get the organization to look at safety not as a department or a person, even not just as a line item on a budget, but as really part of the strategic, it has to have a strategic benefit to the business itself.
Right.
So even those contractors, as you said, or the the project managers, understanding that, hey, I can actually do this, and I know what harnesses to get or how many harnesses to get, and it becomes part of their job costing. That's them taking safety as part of the business.
Yeah.
So that,
and then they talk to an estimator and they identify, hey, on the next job, we have 30-foot trenches. We need to have, cave-in protection, and we want to use this kind, or we're going to rent it. And then they were having those conversations months before the actual exposure was happening on the job, when in the past, I would be walking up to the job in real time to a 30-foot trench, like, what is going on? So like, to me, that was the measure of, oh, we're doing well with safety here, is that I wasn't stumbling upon things where it's like, why didn't you do this? It was, months and months and months, previous, we were discussing, let's look at this job. Let's look at how we're estimating this. So, and then as you were talking, I was thinking how a lot of safety professionals, they're talking about different philosophies. And one thing that people talk about is work as imagined versus work as done.
Yep.
And so back in the day, I totally enabled our project managers to live in imaginary work and imaginary safety and what it takes to really have a safe job. And so we went on that journey of, work as done, and then using that as lessons learned for future projects. So I think when we talk about these safety philosophies, we have to think about not only how safety professionals are, digesting that and what that means, but what does that mean to the operations? Like I'm just so much of a advocate of safety professionals at an organization being this embedded consultant that helps the operations folks do their job better. I am extremely in favor of not having safety be a silo, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So let's integrate for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the takeaways for listeners is get involved in that planning process, that estimating process. Make sure that it's baked in, to those initial estimates and budgets, and then you don't have to go scrounge after the fact that you're part of the process.
Translate that to manufacturing, where you're looking at, what's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, things that you're spending money on, expansions, whatever it is, products. Like I speak in construction, but I think most people can translate it to other industries too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was gonna ask, don't want to incriminate the innocent by any stretch, but there's a lot of conversations that I've been part of is PPE as an example is a commodity, and it's like lowest cost sort of bid. So did you run into that? Was that a challenge, and how did you deal with that if it arose?
Hi, I'm Abby. I used to take pride in how cheap I could get some safety glasses. And I remember I had some that were $1.25 a piece. Then I found some that were 75 cents a piece. And it's like, wow, this is great. And then I realized, oh no, this is not. So
not great.
I am a former bargain basement PPE shopper on some things. So yeah, that's a tough one. So, and then, it relates a lot to your distributors, your partners, that you're ordering from, and negotiating as much as you can, using local companies. Yeah, PPE is always, Gabe, help us all out, right?
So here's what's kind of interesting about this. You made this comment that you were a bargain shopper on some things, which I will tell you, I can totally agree with that. There are going to be some PPE items where it's really just it's churn and burn sort of thing. It's funny you mentioned the glasses. I had a customer that was asking for safety glasses at 50 cents a piece. And I just thought, in my head, I'm thinking there's
in 2023.
Yeah, it was like, why bother? Just tell your people to close their eyes really fast. Like you're basically just doing that.
Right.
And so, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but we know that there's some PPE that it's really just going to be throwaway. It really is. And there are others where it's just, it is absolutely critical to have that. And then you're going to reuse it, and you have to have people understand how to use it and take care of it well. And you mentioned fall protection at one point. Yeah, absolutely. There are those contractor grade harnesses, the economy type ones that
in a bucket.
Yep. Nothing against that, but it's like, don't expect that to last more than 1 or 2 jobs, maybe. But understand also how, if you invest in something, put the money in the right place. As you said, you had some of these contractors or the subs that were going to multiple jobs. You probably don't want to buy new PPE over and over and over. So if that's the case, then go ahead and spend more for it. You'll save more in the long run. But it's just also understanding how the work is done, how people are using it, And yeah, definitely there are others that can help understand that, as long as they know your business.
Yeah. What about the ESG aspect though? I think of like throwing stuff away and it's like, oh, we shouldn't be doing that
Yep.
anymore, like any more than we have to. So, I mean, even back then, I remember there was a PPE distributor that would recycle safety glasses. And so I would have the workers, like I was at the job site, they'd have to bring their poor safety glasses and throw them in the box before I'd give them a new shiny pair. Whether they were $1.25 or $6.99 a piece, they had to turn in the old ones to get the new, because we had this recycling program. So I think looking at suppliers and partners that are aligned with your goals, and sometimes you have benefits as an employer and a business that if you're recycling or doing other environmentally conscious things, that's good. So if that's a business goal at your company, then if you can support that from the safety department, that's a good thing.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, one of our we sell calibration gas at BBL Safety, and we do partner with gas suppliers that allow us to recycle the cylinders. They're not just getting tossed. We tell them you can send them back to us or send them direct to the manufacturer, and they'll go ahead and recycle them and repurpose them. And so now we're not just tossing these cylinders away. But that's something that I think a lot of, even from the operations side or the safety side, it might not be something that they're thinking about, but it's
Right.
definitely on a lot of companies' websites. They usually have some sort of a pledge for sustainability or something like that. So how neat is that as a safety professional to be able to understand the goals of the company and say, hey, even in the PPE that we're purchasing, we are actually aligning it with the company goals. So instead of spending just that 50 cents or 75 cents, whatever, on a safety glass, let's get higher quality ones that will last longer. And then what if we, as you said, set up some sort of a recycling program? So now you're minimizing waste. And then it's something that even from a company standpoint, they can go back and say, look, we're even doing this with our PPE.
Right.
It just gives
And now
more validity.
safety, yeah, exactly. And safety is supporting other enterprise level goals, which is always great. I mean, further to the point of not having safety in a silo, how can safety support the goals of other departments? Not just how can other departments support the safety department?
Exactly.
I was worried Gabe was going to get into total cost of ownership and pull out the
Give us the spiel.
Yeah, I got a chart here. Hold on for a second.
But I think, I mean, you touched on something, and coming back to this safety, influencer idea. I mean, you touched on ESG and bringing in a program, and I think what would be in the best interest of most safety professionals is to try to move away from being the safety cop, and move to be the influencer. And I think that's a great example of forward thinking, forward looking, bigger picture, understanding corporate goals. So are there any other areas that safety professionals could kind of dig into to kind of be the leader within the organization and not the compliance cop?
Yeah, I think safety professionals, sometimes we're keenly hyper aware of the spaces we're being kept out of. And for me, that's where I would always go towards. But not just to be a jerk. And, but I can recall some specific departments that it's almost like I had to discover that they existed. And then you go into this other part of a facility and it's like, whoa, where has this been? Wow, these people work here. Okay. So I've dealt with many situations like that, and where they were not happy to see me. They expected that they would live the rest of their careers and never see a safety person ever, and that's how it should be. And for me, it was the opposite. Like once I found out, it's like, nope, these people are going to be my friends.
I'm in your home
so,
now.
Yes. And so I would have to study a little bit. Like, I'd have a brief introduction to their world, their ecosystem, and then I'd have to go back and debrief. Like, wow, what was that? And how can I help move the needle? So that they someday are calling me before they, do whatever it is that they do, that it's not such a secret. So it required me to be, one, aware of these spaces, and then also two, to identify like, how can I bring value to them? So if you're going to be an influencer, that means that people are looking at what you're doing and listening to what you say, and sometimes making decisions based on what they see you doing or hear you saying, whether you meant for them to hear or see you at all. It just happens. You can't decide, oh, I'm influencing them, I'm not going to influence them over there. It's like, no, you're doing things and it is having influence. So yeah, it's a lot of listening, and a lot of just engaging your senses of the business and bringing things to people that are of value. And in order to bring something to someone that has value, that requires you to know a little bit about what they're doing, what brings them happiness, what pains them, in the work setting. And sometimes it's overt, that you're like actually presenting something to these people, and then you become someone that influences them because they feel that you're credible and you have valuable information and all that. Other times you're working towards being that influencer for people, that it's like, I kind of felt like I was this fly that wouldn't go away for some of these people. And it's like, you're going to like me at some point. Like, there's going to be something that you hear or see from me, and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's good. She knows what's up. So sometimes it's a little more sly to be that influencer. But I think, yeah, ultimately it's just like a lot of awareness, lots of listening. And it's just it's a different approach to the workday. But I think it makes it fun if you think in terms of influencing.
What I like about that too is, and Abby, I know you and I are big fans of Gary Vee, and there's so much that he says about giving and doing like 10 times more than what you're expecting to receive. And so even if you want to influence the people that are in the business, you're essentially wanting to get something out of them. You want them to be on your side, or to advocate for you, or something like that. But you're giving them time and attention first and foremost. You're giving them the benefit of a doubt, or just curiosity, and trying to understand how they're doing. And I think that's really where that influence begins, is not trying to figure out, okay, how do I get this person to actually listen to me or do what I want them to do? It's going towards them first, meeting them where they are, and wanting to give your attention to them. And I mean, maybe some people won't ever come around, but I think from my personal experience, I've very seldom seen that happen. Eventually someone will break.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have to think of another thing Gary Vee says, which is being historically correct. And so sometimes you aren't there for when that person finally connects the dots, and that your influence is realized. You're down the road 5 employers later because, forget that place, I tried, but you had already laid some, put some things out there for people. And, people have to, influence can't be on your schedule. You have to realize, like, influencing is just, it's an act. It's a verb. You're doing this. It's not a thing that someone, gets. It's like, oh, check the box, they've been influenced. That's not how it is. So I think about that. And I haven't listened to a Gary Vee podcast in years. But he clearly influenced me on how to either how to do certain things, or reinforcing how I was doing things. That it's like, oh, this is a thing. Okay, I'll keep doing that. So, but yeah, the historical correctness thing was like a game changer for me, because I have seen, sadly, some things that I started, initiatives, influence, that I started in the past, that it didn't take while I was there. I left, something happened, and then, dots are connected, and things are done differently. So, really cool. It goes both ways. It could be a happy thing or it could be a sad thing. But I think you just have to keep at it. It's about being genuine, and true to how you want to practice safety, and not so much worried about is everyone going to like you or connect with you.
Because they probably won't like you.
Well, I love that.
They might not.
Yeah, they might not.
I love that. Love the point about, hey, at some point, I know if I do the right thing and I ask questions and I'm here to help, at some point, you know, people will say, aha, I realize now how, you know, how you know, Abby's influenced us and how we can incorporate her ideas and move forward.
And I don't even have to know. It's okay. Like,
yeah.
Because I'm just out there doing my thing. I forgot about it already. So
yeah, well, I'm, you know, patience and playing that long game. You know, I think Gary Vee would talk about long game as well. Just was there any like big initiatives that, like, we're talking PPE and harness, you know, fall protection gear, but were there any big initiatives that you were wanting to introduce to an organization? And you know, if so,
you know,
kind of influencing those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, one of those things, I won't even be specific about it, but it came to a point where a lot of safety professionals come in their career where it's like, well, I've tried, and you know, this situation no longer aligns with how I can do my day-to-day work and still feel okay about myself. So that's a bad example.
That's tough.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I think like the biggest project, like if I'm going to get like philosophical and like, you know, soft here, is I'm looking now at my career. I'm 20 years into my career. And so I'm looking at things like trying to weave together the story. And I feel like a lot of it is related to women in safety and women growing into executive roles, and also serving the women in the trades careers and that are at, you know, in these traditionally male populated fields. And, you know, the numbers just aren't there. And so now more women are entering these career paths, and we have to make sure that we are meeting their needs. So I feel like that, like, that's my big initiative. And it's, you know, I've done different things and different stops in my career that have kind of led to, or that have contributed to, this initiative. And for me, it's not so much about getting a program going at one employer, but it's about a much greater influence of the profession, and helping out people in our profession to ultimately serve the workers better. That sounds like really grand, but it just, I don't know, like I've had some great opportunities. Though. Yeah, like this is a great opportunity, Safety Justice League podcast, and leadership that I had within WISE at ASSP. And I just feel that I have to look at that and see like, wow, there's been a lot of stuff I've been doing, but it all kind of comes together with something. And so if I was having like a midlife, mid-career crisis, I think that would be it. And I think I figured it out. So yeah.
So that's awesome. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having that big grand vision and having that direction and having things kind of fall into place in that. And so, I mean, what a great way to kind of cap where you are at 20 years in the safety profession. But if we were to rewind back to, you know, the Abby that just got started in the safety profession, because there are a lot of people like that are just getting into safety, and we've talked a lot about the things you did to influence a business, getting the ear of management and the workers. What are maybe 3 things maybe that new safety professional can start doing, so that 20 years later they can look back and say, okay, this has been my influence in it?
I think every day people should think of questions. Like that's the only way we're going to get better, is if we learn something new or continue to learn about our environment that we're in, the workplace that we're serving, or the profession that we're in. So thinking of intelligent, open-ended questions. And so then step 2 is finding people to ask those questions of. So it's the workers that you're surrounded by at your organization, but then also finding a mentor, someone that either is in the career path that you're in and you want to know a little bit more about how the day-to-day goes, or someone that's in a career or at a stop in their career that you want to be in someday, and that you can ask pointed, open-ended questions to find out, okay, how did they get there? What did they do? And how can I start doing some of those things right now too, or whatever it means to me. 3. You wanted 3 things?
I feel like there was a lot that was in there. Even just, Abby, you and I have talked about mentoring and advocacy and sponsorship, and there's so much rolled into that. So those are great points.
You know what I miss though is like your crew. Like Gabe, I feel like you're in my crew. Scott, you can be in the crew too. On Safety Justice League, we talked about like the group chat. And so at organizations I've worked at, I always have like, my work friends that I feel we can talk about everything. We can talk about salary. We could talk about, memes. We can talk about whatever, heavy or not so heavy stuff. And I think that's what can help you also. And they can identify mentors for you. They can identify courses of study for you. But it's more of like a peer group to bounce things off of, not so much aspirational and not the people that you're serving as far as frontline workers, but it's peers that know what you're going through. Because safety, it can be really lonely, especially at places where you don't have safety colleagues, safety department. So you need that outlet of other people that know where you're coming from.
Again, one of those things that requires almost no budget.
Yeah, that's zero.
Yeah, this is a zero budget tip right there.
Yeah.
I was gonna, I know we got to wrap up here shortly, but I was just gonna ask, because influencer is definitely a buzzword, in many different industries, some not quite as noble as safety. But, in your mind, is there a difference between leadership and influencing? Or is it one and the same?
Wow. That's a really great question, because I think usually people would put an influencer in a different category than a leader. But when I think of good leaders within an organization or within a profession, they're an influencer. I mean, so I think it does have to go hand in hand, but sometimes, a lot of times, an influencer may not be a leader, like not in that leadership or management or supervisor role. And those are my favorite people, because those are my safety. I can't think of the right word. I've had multiple words for these people, safety champions, or, you brand it however you can at your organization, but it's someone who does a great job for safety or understands safety or wants to learn more about it, but they're a pipe fitter, or they're, a laborer, and they're not a supervisor level person, but that's great. That's fine. So I love to use those safety influencers, safety champions who aren't leaders, because they are leaders. People look to them, but I think you need that combination of those unofficial leaders that they're influencers really. And a leader still does, to be a good leader, I think you need to be able to influence people. So it's both.
I agree with that. Awesome. Well, Abby, thank you so much for joining us. This was a ton of fun to have you on Safeonomics. And there was a lot to unpack here, and I'm sure we'll have conversations more in the future, but this is fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, you guys. Anytime.
Yeah, we have to bring Abby back and dive into her current role and organization, and how you're, again, influencing the industry, I think, on a large scale, and also let people know they can reach out and connect with you, whether it's about Insurate or whether it's about just some general advice.
For sure.
We'll make sure to.
Yeah, I mean, we said budget for you guys, but I don't think we said risk one time. So way back on, we'll talk about risk.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Abby.